Good afternoon and thank you for joining us. I'm Dave Edwards. I'm the Chief Executive here at the Royal Aeronautical Society. On the eve of International Women's Day, I'm honoured to be introducing this report on gender diversity in pilot training. Co-authored by the University of the West of England and a member of the Society's Flight Crew Training Specialist Group, it's the culmination of work by the university's research team, led by Sue Durbin, Professor of Human Resource Management and Employment Studies, Stella Warren, Research Fellow at the Bristol Leadership and Change Centre, together with Marnie Munns, an airline captain and trainer, as well as member of the Society's Flight Crew Training Group and Council. The report does not make light reading. It highlights an ongoing and significant challenge for women in the aviation industry, particularly as they progress their careers into training roles. Areas such as sexism, sexual harassment and the old boys network continue to exist. Working hours remain a challenge, together with barriers to entry are still unaddressed. The authors will be talking you through the study shortly, explaining in more depth those challenges, but also offering recommendations on the way in which the industry can work together to fix these issues and make a career in aviation open to anyone. The work of our volunteer-led specialist groups is vital. Collectively, they produce a huge amount of learned output, from conferences through webinars, through research and policy papers, to responding to government consultations. Their work inspires discussion, thought and change. It helps shape our sector for the challenges ahead, as well as providing inspiration for the next generation of our industries. If you're a member of the Society, I'd invite you to reach out to any specialist group that's of interest and becoming as involved as you can be in their work. Finally, I want to thank the report's authors, Professor Sue Durbin, Stella Warren and Captain Marnie Munns, together with Carey Edwards of the Flight Crew Training Group, for their work on the study and today's webinar. I'd also like to record my thanks to UE, the Higher Education Innovation Fund, everyone who gave their time to be interviewed for the study and was so candid in their responses, as well as Professor Hazel Connolly from UE and the Society's Learned Society Board for their peer review and our staff for their work. I hope you find this report and today's webinar insightful, and I'm pleased to introduce Marnie Munns and Carey Edwards.
Hello, welcome everyone. I just wanted to start off by really introducing everyone who's going to be launching the report today. So first of all, it has been my pleasure to work with these very learned people. Professor Sue Durbin, she is the head of or professor of human resource management and employment studies at the University of West of England. She actually specialises in women's non-traditional employment in male-dominated industries, including commercial pilots, scientists, engineers, senior managers and managers who work on reduced hours basis. She's the co-founder of the ALTA Mentoring Scheme, a bespoke industry-wide mentoring programme that's designed for women by women in the aviation and aerospace industry, and that also sits with the Royal Aeronautical Society as an independent element. Stella Warren is a research fellow and has expertise in gender and inequality in organisations, the gender pay gap, race and inclusive leadership, and women working in male-dominated industries. She also helped found the ALTA Mentoring Scheme for professional women in aviation and aerospace. I myself, I do know a lot of people who have come to the webinar today, and I'd just like to thank you. My role as part of the Royal Aeronautical Society, I'm an elected member of the council. I'm Deputy Head of Diversity and Inclusion for the Flight Crew Training Group, and the Women Aerospace and Aviation Committee. I'm also an experienced airline pilot, who's also a TRI, type rating instructor for those who aren't familiar with that term, a multi-crew instructor and a crew management resource instructor. Carey Edwards, who is Head of Diversity and Inclusion in the Flight Crew Training Group. It was a helicopter pilot with the RAF and is currently a trainer specialising in instructor training, EBT and human factors with LMQ. He was chairman of the Royal Aeronautical Society Human Factors Group originally. And if I could pass you over to Kerry now, it's my pleasure to introduce him to introduce how this all came about. Kerry, if I could just introduce you now and just ask you to unmute, we would like to find out a bit more about the study.
Sorry about that. Finger trouble. I muted and unmuted and then muted. Good afternoon, everyone, east of Greenwich, and good morning to those early birds west. In line with the Royal Aeronautical Society policy, the Flight Crew Training Group were required to develop a diversity plan, which we have done. As a good starting point, I will refer to key parts of the plan to explain why this research has come about. So firstly, the vision. The Flight Crew Training Specialist Group will lead by example and provide advisory guidance in order to significantly contribute to the flight crew training community achieving appropriate levels of diversity and inclusion. So that was the vision that we set out for ourselves. The main objective of our plan was to achieve representative percentages of aircrew at all levels among diverse groups in flight crew by 2035. Following on from those are some sub-objectives, which was to accurately identify the barriers to achieving diversity by September 2021, to effectively promote that women flight crew trainers make up the same percentage of total women pilots compared to the percentage of male flight crew trainers of total male pilots by 2025. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically it's about making sure that the same percentages were there. Now, supporting those were core strategy, which was that the above vision objectives will be met by working collaboratively with industry to identify why diversity is not being achieved and developing innovative strategies to removing these barriers through positive action and effective communications. And that led us on to taking some specific action steps. And the ones which we had come up with, which are relevant to today, are that we will research both good and poor practice in recruitment, selection, training, roles, and type of operations. We will arrange focus groups to identify barriers to diversity at all stages and areas, together with understanding the reasons why. We'll organize conferences to share ideas, research, and brainstorm solutions to these barriers. And we'll develop a scheme to support more women and other diverse groups of aircrew to become trainers. Now, we chose the subject of female trainers because it is most relevant, obviously, to the flight crew training group, and also the underrepresentation is obvious. Furthermore, by cracking this issue, we think this will help with the recruitment of female pilots, so as they will have role models to look up to and to follow. We're not excluding other protected groups, but the data on underrepresentation of these groups is not clear. In other words, we do not know the baseline, but we do know that for women, it's obviously 50% of the population. So Marnie.
So the research came about from the initial document that the Royal Aeronautical Society wanted us to look at. And the opportunity came up with Professor Sue Durbin, where we worked together to actually access some funding through the Higher Education Innovation Fund. I might like to point out that at the moment, the industry has very little funding available to look into very specific problems, especially around female pilots and minority group pilots. And that was something that was highlighted in the government when I spoke to them at the beginning of the pandemic. They asked where all the data was in our industry. It is definitely lacking, and so is any funding for research. So there was a wonderful opportunity to have a knowledge exchange with the University of West of England, where we can impart our industry knowledge onto them, and they can use their academic knowledge and research practices to help us get valid and quality research done in this really important area. Which brings me on to the importance of independent data gathering. This study in itself went through 6 weeks of ethics approval before it was able to be passed. And the university holds the data, and this is to protect those individuals that have given their time and comments to the study to help us try and understand the lived experiences of pilots. And all of this was made possible, strangely and bizarrely, because of the pandemic. Pilots are notoriously difficult to get hold of in organisations, and organisations themselves will know this. So to be able to access this many pilots and get their opinions has just been unprecedented, and has come about purely because of the connection that has occurred behind the scenes due to the pandemic. So before we go any further, talking of professional research methods, this particular study was done using what we call a mixed methodology. This meant that it could encapsulate as much information as possible. And I'm going to hand you over to Sue and Stella to talk us through the major findings of the report and the data that they were able to collect.
Thank you, Marnie. I'm just going to reshare because we have I had to get my controls up here, so hopefully you can all hear me. So my name is Stella Warren. I'm the research fellow and have been working with Professor Sue Durbin over a number of years on projects specifically with dealing with women in male-dominated industries. So I'm just going to take you through the methodology of the research. So Marnie touched on there just now that this was a mixed methods piece of research. So it was a mixture of an online survey to collect some quantitative data, and we also collected qualitative data. So within the survey, we had some open questions, and right at the end, we gave respondents the opportunity to share their lived experiences through sort of an essay, so share their stories. And we also conducted a series of focus groups, and I'll go into a bit more detail for both of these methods. So the online survey was distributed between the 2nd and 28th of June 2021. It was hosted on Qualtrics, which is a secure online platform, and UE here at University of the West of England, we have a data management agreement with them, so we knew it was secure. It was distributed through various networks, and Marnie was incredibly helpful there through distributing the link for the survey, and also for helping us with the technology, with the particular terms and that we needed to include. So we had, the reach was 7,000 student newly qualified pilots, commercial pilots and pilot trainers. We had something around 966 people actually accessed the survey. Not everybody finished it, so there was some data cleansing. But we asked specific questions to conditionally display the appropriate questions for different groups. So depending on their role, they were asked specific questions. And what we wanted to do was explore the background for commercial pilots, their training qualifications, the routes into training, future career aspirations. And then with the pilot trainers, experiences of being a pilot trainer, the recruitment process, their experiences of their role, the skills required, motivations, enablers and barriers to the role. And then everybody was asked some demographic questions at the end. For the qualitative methods, as I said, we had some open questions within the survey, but at the end there were 4 essay-style open questions, and respondents were given notice that these were coming up, so they were able to, they knew that they were going to be asked for further detail. And this enabled us to collect quite a few testimonials for the qualitative part. Those follow-up questions were very important, but we also wanted to hold a discussion. So based on the initial analysis of the quantitative data, we created a focus group guide, and Sue Durbin conducted the focus groups with male and female pilots and pilot trainers. So they were homogeneous groups. So we had a group of male and a group of female. And from that qualitative data, we conducted a thematic analysis. So we were looking for patterns in the data there. So a nice overview of the survey. So as I said, it was distributed to around 7,000. We had just under 1,000 who accessed it. And after data cleansing, we had 707 responses that were analysed. The majority of those were commercial pilots or pilot trainers. We did have a few retired or redundant commercial pilots or trainers, and they were asked to complete this based on the most recent role. And we also had a small number of student or newly qualified commercial pilots. On the demographics, as we expected, the majority, so 3/4 were male, just a quarter. These are the ones that actually disclosed their gender, so not everybody did. And also with the age range, for those that disclosed, the majority were between the ages of 25 and 54. For the ethnicity, the majority were white. We had 400 responses who selected white as their ethnicity. We did have a large proportion of Asian respondents, so a lot from India. There were 237, and the others there, so Black, African, Caribbean, or mixed and multiple ethnic groups were also represented in there, but in smaller numbers. We asked them for their where they were based and where they were operating, and this was a multiple choice selection. All of the regions of the globe were represented. The majority were in the UK and Northern Ireland, followed by Asia, and then Europe. So for the focus group sample, there were 4 focus groups that were actually conducted. Sue conducted these, so the homogeneous groups, they were conducted online. Each focus group lasted approximately 2 hours, and the data from these focus groups was transcribed verbatim, and that allowed us to conduct the thematic analysis. So we had female pilot trainers, male pilot trainers, female commercial pilots, and male commercial pilots. And as you can see here, we've got the spread of ages and the regions. So moving on to the findings. So that was a whistle stop of describing our sample. But on the findings, we did have a number of positive findings. So the majority of our respondents identified the pilot trainer or the pilot role as a vocation. So 61% of our respondents said that they'd always wanted to be a pilot. Many were influenced by family members or by having a conversation or knowing a commercial pilot. So with family members, 46% of our female respondents and 33% of our male respondents were influenced by family members in applying for a commercial pilot role. Overall, satisfaction levels were very high, more so for men than for women, and this is satisfaction level in their career. And most felt that they belonged in the industry, felt respected, valued, and intended to stay. However, this did tend to drop when we asked if they would recommend the profession to others. So 53% of women and 57% of men said that they would recommend. We also asked what the ideal skills were for a pilot trainer role, and the male and female respondents both tended to have agreement about those skills. So the key skills were given, and there was not very much difference in between those two groups as to how they answered. And we do have some information on that for you in the report. So having said that, we need to ask the question, why are there so few female pilot trainers? So these are the main report findings, if I go through these 4 here, underrepresentation of women in the pilot trainer role, we've termed this as the part-time paradox. There's a reluctance from airlines and training companies to offer the pilot training role on a part-time basis, which has resulted in preventing women from applying. There are also a lack of role models and mentors for women in pilot training roles. So there's no safe space to talk to another person, especially during the early days in the industry. When they're training or newly qualified, and there are very few female trainers to act as role models. And within our research, we found that the female respondents had quoted the fact that having a role model enabled the pathway for 66% of female pilot trainers had a role model that would help them there. On the lack of transparency in the recruitment and selection process, we've got some detail on that. So it did tend to be this old boys network came up. So this sexism and sexual harassment, we didn't ask specific questions about this. In fact, those terms weren't mentioned by us at all, either in the survey or in the focus group. But it came up, it emerged spontaneously as a strong and worrying trend. So we did ask about working patterns, and we wanted to compare pre and post pandemic. So the numbers working full time dropped by around a half between October 2019 and January 2021. In October, overall, 80% of males were working full time, 57% of females, which dropped to 39% of males in January and 21% of females working full time. Amongst the other responses, it was mostly our respondents had been furloughed, had been made redundant, or had been were unemployed, described themselves as unemployed. We did ask what their preferred working patterns would be, and overall, 46% of pilot trainers preferred to work full time, but women were significantly still interested in working part time, but some men also had that preference. So offering part time would actually encourage more women to apply. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Sue now, who's going to take you through the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Stella. Hi, everybody. I'm Professor Sue Durbin. So in terms of the part-time working, you know, we saw this as a real stumbling block for women in the industry. So whilst it's acceptable to be a pilot working part-time, it doesn't seem to be acceptable for a pilot trainer to work part-time. So I'm sure you can see the problem that women would have if they wanted to stay part-time going into a pilot trainer role. So there is that reluctance for airlines to offer the pilot trainer role. I think Air France and TUI are two of the airlines that do offer it part-time, but you know, that's not enough. It really needs to be across the industry. So so they're reluctant to offer it on a part-time basis. So we called it the part-time paradox because, you know, it can't be offered on that basis, but there are people that would like to apply for the role if it was available on a part-time basis. And this came out very strongly from our qualitative data from men and women that actually, you know, this role should be offered on a part-time basis. So, you know, it prevents women from applying, and it does stand in contradiction to bringing gender balance into the industry. So 0.9% of pilot trainers in the UK who are qualified as TREs, you know, are actually in the pilot trainer role. I mean, I think you'll agree with me that that is not a good figure. So in the survey, just 49% of women compared to 72% of men of our pilot respondents. So these are people who are qualified pilots but never been a pilot trainer, intended to apply for a trainer role. And I think you'll see possibly why, because we're going to go through these four main headlines that Stella gave you a few minutes ago. You know, you'll see why that could be the case. So the average age to become a trainer is 34 years. So what happens around 34, 35, 36, 37 is people have children, but, you know, women are the ones that, you know, more often than not end up being the main carers of those children. So they have to make choices. One of those choices would be, well, I'm a really good, well-qualified pilot. I'd like to carry on my career. I'd like to progress. I'd like to become a trainer, but, oh, I can't because I can't do the role on a part-time basis. So the industry seems reluctant to support non-traditional career paths for part-time workers. And we have to think about older people in that age group. So some of my focus group respondents were saying there are a lot of qualified people out there, really qualified, experienced, who are older, but they won't apply for the pilot training role because it's not offered on a part-time basis. So it's not just, you know, people with children, it's also about those people with all that experience, but they tend to be older. Interestingly, 46% of current trainers in the survey would prefer to work part-time, and 34% of female pilots intend to remain part-time. So, you know, if the role's not offered, then those 34% of the female pilots would never be able to apply. So we always think, you know, sharing quotes from people brings all of this to life. You know, we can show you lots of stats, but I think these quotes speak for themselves. You know, women have got children, they're part-time, you know, part-time pilots, and our airline won't allow part-time simulator trainers, or I don't think line trainers either at the moment. So, and I think it also depends when you get into training. So if you get into training before you have children and you have those commitments where you're part-time, it's probably easier to carry it on. So that kind of backs up the earlier statements we were making. You know, but as this person said, I couldn't imagine doing a TRI course with children. So if you get all of those courses out of the way before you start the family, you know, that's the kind of thing, it makes it easier. So that was from a female pilot trainer who's actually in the role. Another female pilot who's not a trainer said, I have aspirations to become a pilot trainer way into the future. I've just started, but I'm already aware that I may be affected by the full-time, part-time issue. So, you know, somebody at the beginning of their career, that, you know, that's a real stumbling block for her. And then one of our male pilots, you know, my only comment on encouraging females is a conundrum for them whereby they tend to have the experience to train at a similar time to childbearing. And a lot of men did actually say this. There was a high level of awareness amongst the men that, you know, their female colleagues were actually being held back. Okay, so that kind of covers what we call the part-time paradox. And moving on now to the second point that Stella made earlier about the importance of role models for pilot trainers. So as Stella said, that our female pilot trainers in the study actually did say to us, yes, I did have a role model and it really helped me. Now, they could have been male or female role models, but, you know, in the research, a lot of women said they would like to have more female role models. And then men and women told us there is a need for more role models in training to encourage more female pilot trainers, but women were way more likely to say that than their male colleagues. And in terms of disappointment at there being so few women pilot trainers, obviously that was a much higher number, 84% of women compared to 45% of men were disappointed about the lack of women trainers, because part of this research was trying to get a kind of handle on, you know, how both men and women feel about a lack of gender equality. So role models and mentors, you know, we've talked about role models in the previous slide, but mentors are even more important. They can be a source of support and a safe space to encourage and support women in the industry. We know this. We were, you know, lead partners in the outer mentoring programme. So we know, we've talked to women across the industry, and, you know, we've been instrumental in setting up an actual mentoring scheme for women, including women pilots. So 66% of female trainers said that having a role model enabled their pathway. That's really important to work, you know, that. An enabler, not just an assister, but an enabler. That's really powerful. Mentors and role models could help women to weigh up the pros and cons of the trainer role. So should I go for it? Shouldn't I go for it? You know, it's not for everybody. And mentors, we think mentors would be especially important at the initial pilot training stage, where women are tokens and that, you know, they are facing the challenges, which we'll go on to tell you about in a moment. And 81% of women in our survey said that having a mentor stroke advisor for their future career would encourage them to apply for the trainer role, compared to 49% of men. So we can see there that the women do need encouragement, and that's because they make up such a minority, and sometimes having the confidence to apply for something in a very male-dominated environment can be a big challenge for women. Okay, so some more quotes here, just to back up what we've said there. mentorship of young pilots and encourage them to pursue traineeship, leadership roles in the future. Most women are taught to self-doubt, and some confidence building exercises required. That's from a female pilot. Female pilot trainer says, the men are more confident in there than the women, despite the research that shows female pilots can often outperform males. So they need encouragement and recommendations from people. So, it has to go outside of what we call the old boys network, which will come on a bit later. Female pilot trainer, having that female mentor support changes your mental framework. I can do it. How do I do this? And I think I can do it. And then a couple of the guys who answered the open questions, they agreed that you needed more role models in the top jobs and more press or advertising that includes women in top roles. So, so women can see, if you're a young trainee pilot or somebody just newly qualified, but you can see that there are women training the future pilots, that kind of gives you an example of, well, I can do that too later on. And, showing the world through the media that women can do the job. And then schemes and mentor support from the company to demonstrate the need and desire to actively bring more women into these roles. So that's really important, to have something formally set up, as well as the informal role modelling and mentoring.
Thank you, Sue. So we're going to nip back to the survey analysis. So we did ask questions about the recruitment and selection for pilot trainers. So majority were through a formal application and interview. Overall, this was slightly different for male and female, though. So the females were much more likely to go through a formal application than their male counterparts. 90% of our respondents had never applied for a pilot training role. So there's this lack of transparency in the recruitment and selection process, which we also wanted to explore through the survey. So, as I said, most went through a formal interview, but some men were invited without interview. And when it came to the interview panel, we asked how many female pilots were represented on that panel, and very few. So there were 11 respondents said that there was one female on the panel, and 4 respondents said there were 2. There were a couple of respondents that mentioned that the only females that were in the room were either themselves as applicants or maybe somebody from HR, but certainly not pilots. Most of the recruitment was reported to have been done internally and mostly by men. And there was a feeling that if your face didn't fit, you weren't going to be successful. And this was pointed out, especially if you weren't ex-military. So there was an expectation that it would be a male ex-military, and therefore they would recruit in their own vision. There aren't any industry recommendations for recruitment and selection, specifically regarding diversity. Now, we only looked at the gender question on this, but we did collect some data on ethnicity as well, and we would very much like to explore that even further. We also asked about where potential applicants got their information about the pilot trainer role. So 60% of males, compared with 49% of females, felt that they did have access to information on career development opportunities. 32% of male and 36% of females felt that they didn't. So this lack of transparency in the recruitment and selection process. So this was mostly from the qualitative data, so from the open question on the survey, although some from the focus group. So with the female pilots, they felt that the recruitment selection should be more open and transparent. There should be more information, so the skills required should be advertised. And there's that lack of encouragement at the moment. So the application process being confidential, there was a worry that was maybe a barrier for them to actually apply in the first place. And recruitment should be based on merit, not just because your face fitted. And the trainer role should be more diverse. So at the moment, it's very, very male dominated. So there's a lack of diversity actually in the trainer role. Female pilot trainers felt that there's the more encouragement to progress to higher positions, and that visibility. So those role models are lacking at the moment. So we need to have the few female pilot trainers that there should be much more visible. Male pilots felt that there should be more scrutiny of the process, and they did actually mention the unconscious bias, having more women in more senior positions, in decision-making positions around recruitment, and making information available about the role, and that would encourage more women. But basically, that they wanted a more practical solution to actually encourage more women to apply for that trainer role. And we've got a couple of comments here. So again, a female pilot here. So women don't tend to apply unless they meet every single criteria and are encouraged to do so. So the barrier is there at the beginning. So they're thinking that without a role model or without a mentor to advise them and encourage them, they wouldn't do it. So looking at having a more diverse team, you in the hiring, and having that individual encouragement would help there. And a male pilot, looking at adding the female trainers to the selection process. So that's removing that intimidation. And then another male pilot here, airlines need to talk to female pilots to find out why they're not applying. Well, this is what we've been doing for this particular research, but it's something that should be done, should have been done. So looking at the selection system, looking for that unconscious, even if it's unintentional, but that it obviously is there, but also encouraging female pilots. So that could be through that mentorship, that could be through those role models. So they have got, this male pilot did identify that narrow body of people in management, and admitting here that off the top of his head, without thinking too hard about it, most managers were white male, and quite a few were ex-military.
Thanks, Stella. So back to me again. So towards the end of the survey, and you'll see all of this when we release the report after there will be a link to the link for the report will be in the chat. I don't know if it's there yet, but it will be before the end of the session. We had a section on their views on the industry and basically D&I in the industry. So we asked a question about, have you ever been treated differently because of your gender? And you can see the numbers there. So 17% of men said they had, and 42% of the women. This is from the sample in the survey. So we didn't have any open questions on that because we had other open questions in the survey, but that's interesting in itself, you can see the difference in the figures. We then said, do you feel you've ever been discriminated against and for any reason? And again, women were more likely to say yes than men, but it was slightly lower than being treated different when we asked about gender. And we also wanted to know if people have ever witnessed discrimination, and more men had witnessed it, which I think was interesting, than they'd been discriminated against or treated differently. And, it was quite a high number for witnessing discrimination amongst the women as well. So they were tick box questions. So we didn't have any follow up on those. But coming to our fourth theme, and a really important theme of the study, is sexism and sexual harassment. So we didn't ask a question about sexism and sexual harassment. It just wasn't something, the furthest we went was asking the 3 questions on discrimination treated differently and witnessing discrimination. But it emerges as a worrying trend in our qualitative data, especially at the pilot trainee stage, and especially for women, but also for men, mainly in terms of being excluded from the old boys network, but it was a big trend for women. So we found evidence, sadly, of systematic sexual harassment and bullying towards female trainees, and relatively high levels of dissatisfaction amongst male trainees. And this data was really interesting and quite surprising. So men were about 50% of the men that answered this open question were not happy with the training, but the women, the vast majority of women that answered this question said they'd experienced some kind of sexism, sexual harassment or bullying. So sexual harassment, you know, you might be thinking, well, what does she mean by that? And what does she mean by sexism? But, you know, we know it happens on a scale from the kind of banter and the jokes that, you know, oh, you know, it's just a joke, to being undermined, which happened a lot to women in our study, to physical abuse, sadly, in some cases. There were a small number of cases of those, but it did happen. So many women in some men reported being excluded from the old boys network. So the men tended to say, well, yeah, there is an old boys network, and as a man, I feel excluded from that. But, you know, women kind of said, well, yeah, it's there. I am excluded from it. I know it's there, and I know it works against me. And the industry is also influenced by military culture. So I think 17% of our respondents were military trained. So, you know, it's about just under a fifth. But although you've got a small number, that can still influence a culture in a number of ways, and it can be quite a strong influence as well. So, you know, you have to bear that in mind. And both male and female respondents felt all of this was still happening today. So in our open questions 2 and 3, we asked, why do you think there are so few female pilot trainers, and what do you think can be done? So again, we were getting reports of, well, you know, sexism, sexual harassment being excluded. But one of the main reasons that men were unhappy at their training stage of becoming a pilot trainer was because they felt, you know, they thought the cost of training was too high, and you know, about 50% said they thought the standard of training wasn't that great either. In contrast, the women talked a lot about sexual harassment. So you'll see some of this in the quotes. So we've included a few quotes here. There are many, many more of these. So only female student on my course, stupid degrading comments along the lines of cleaning planes from both an instructor and a student. So that's what we would call, sadly, the more subtle form of, you know, sexism or sexual harassment. But this can be really, really demoralising for a young woman. So, you know, this is really concerning. Harassed on a daily basis in that second quote. You know, that's shocking that somebody has paid a great deal of money to go and train to be a pilot and has to be harassed on a daily basis. So 2 female students out of 28. The third quote, my gender and how I look was always commented upon. Sexist jokes from peers and trainers. They need a culture change. They need to head away from the old boys culture. You know, it has to be known that female pilots don't have to act as a typical man to be a good pilot. But when you're a young pilot trainee, it's difficult to have the confidence to say that, you know, I don't have to be one of the guys, you know, I have to try and fit in. So, you know, that's a sad, the fact of it, really. A couple of male pilot comments here, still a very chauvinistic macho culture, mostly in the white, straight, male-dominated modern cockpit. You know, this guy talked about his lack of self-confidence that he carried with him for a long time. Toxic masculine environment. So again, he said we need a lack of, you know, that only a lack of tolerance of any kind of prejudice and positive role models. You know, so those role models again are coming up as important. That's going to break it down. So if you leave it as it is, it's not going to change. And he acknowledges the unpopular notion of positive discrimination, but he felt it was a necessary evil. And the quote at the bottom, I did always feel like a bit of there was an old boys network, which even as a male felt uncomfortable. And a fair few number of men actually said that. And we thought it was important to look at this currently as well. You know, so we had 27 trainee or recently qualified pilots, and you know, they're making similar comments. You know, I think early experiences can scare people off. You know, this person talks about being hit in the simulator when they were 35. Imagine if I were only 20. And you know, she was talking to a friend the other day, and it's still going on. It's a miracle us women don't leave the industry altogether. And I can understand that. So the women that stay, you know, it's often a struggle for them. Aviation industry riddled with sexist and misogynist. training department run by old boys clubs, male-dominated industry, and it's always been like this. It's historical until we reach some critical mass. That's a long way off. Only 6% of pilots in the UK are on women. As I said, only 0.9% of pilot trainers are women. So there needs to something needs to happen. I don't think anybody in our survey said we shouldn't do anything about this. They feel we should do something about it. So that's taken you through our main findings. I mean, the report's long. It's with appendices. It's 130 pages, so there's a lot of data in there. But they're the main findings, the main headlines. So we're going to talk now about some recommendations that we think. So I'm not going to summarise the conclusions. I'm going to move on to the recommendations. So recommendation 1, to make the role available on a part-time basis. So, we think employers should seriously consider this, and it's not just the airlines, it's the training schools as well. This full-time rule is excluding many women and some men. There were some men in our survey, about 25% said they would prefer to work on a part-time basis. So keeping this, what we call the full-time rule, discourages gender equality, and could it be challenged on the basis of discrimination, because you're inadvertently excluding a whole group of people, and you're not really tapping into the talent pools that's out there. So we think employers, training schools, the professional body being the Royal Aeronautical Society should commission a feasibility study on part-time working in the trainer role. It seems to be accepted at the pilot role. So, why is this big brick wall come up, and why is it causing that big barrier? And look at, I'm a great believer in look at how somebody is doing this and doing it well. So let's look to TUI and Air France, using independent external experts to do that. Make the role more attractive to older male and female pilots who have that experience to train and want to work part-time. People in our focus group talked about this. There are lots of people out there with the experience, but they won't do it on a full-time basis. So that's a loss of talent. And the pandemic has demonstrated that the role can be performed on a part-time basis. So, could the industry learn and think, well, OK, let's carry on looking at this on a part-time basis? In terms of role models and mentors, we really need more visible female role models and female mentors who could help to partially tackle the problems that women encounter regarding sexual harassment. So we think women would be better placed to support women on this. When we did the feasibility study for the outer mentoring programme, women overwhelmingly said that they would prefer to have a female mentor because they worked in a very male-dominated industry. But that's not to say women don't want male mentors, but a lot of women want female mentors. So we think a formal mentoring scheme should be set up for women pilots, especially at that initial pilot training stage. So, why can't a trainee pilot have a mentor, or somebody that they can go to, somebody they can trust, somebody they could talk to in confidence? That's really important, I think. In the academic world, if you're learning, you have a supervisor. So why can't that happen in airlines? And make this a formal scheme based upon the principles of the outer mentoring scheme. And we're happy to talk to any airlines or training schools who want to know more about that. And it's about going beyond tokenism and encouraging the experienced women in the industry to become mentors. So, often women are overlooked to become mentors. They'd like to share their experiences. But again, when you work in a very male-dominated industry, sometimes it's a challenge to put your head above the parapet and say, I'm here, come and talk to me. Our third main finding around recruitment and selection, as Stella said earlier, there is a barrier there for women to apply, and there's not enough information for men and women about the role actually. So recruitment and selection needs to be far more transparent. So what's the role about? Who can apply? And how do you go about applying? So you'll see in the survey that although most men and women were aware of how to apply, men tended to have more access to information about the roles. Again, we think the regulator, so when we talk about the regulator, we talk about the Civil Aviation Authority, or the CAA, the professional body, the training schools, employers, they need to work by an industry standard for recruitment and selection. You know, this is standard practice now across a lot of industries. You know, how you run your recruitment and selection. Do you have a good gender representation on your recruitment and selection panels? What's the age? What does the age group look like? What kind of experiences and backgrounds do those people have? So it's much about diversifying recruitment. So getting away from that group think in terms of, well, this is the kind of person we're looking for. Actually, you know, make that more diverse. There should be less reliance on internal male-dominated recruitment processes, and, you know, as I've just said, introducing more gender diversity amongst recruiters. Now, we realise, and I think Kerry made this point earlier, that, you know, we are talking about gender today, but almost 40% of our respondents were Asian. So we do have a lot of data in terms of ethnicity, which hasn't yet been analysed separately. And we didn't want to identify people by gender, age and ethnicity for this report because it's such a small industry. We thought people could be identified. And why not have a targeted recruitment campaign to get more women into training roles? You know, a fair number of the men in the survey felt, you know, yeah, we should encourage more women. You know, we should maybe have, let's have a target to make the pilot training role 10% of women. That's only a small target at the moment, but if only 0.9% are currently pilot trainers, then, you know, that would be increasing it quite substantially. And of course, advertising all roles. We saw from Stella's data that, you know, some men are invited to interview and sometimes not interviewed for the roles. So, you know, that's kind of like the face fit, somebody I know I can trust. So, you know, we have to get around that as well. And finally, on the fourth finding and the fourth recommendation, we feel that there are some key actors who could help to tackle sexual harassment and sexism generally. So we think employers need to bring in some D&I expertise into the industry. Now, I know there are D&I people in airlines, but, you know, they need to work with outside specialists who've got up-to-date knowledge and expertise in this area to deliver training in mandatory gender diversity training. And also, we think this is really important, professional conduct to trainers and trainees. So it's not just about how the trainers treat the trainees, it's how the trainees treat one another. You know, when you've got 2 women out of 28 trainees, all the rest are male, then that can be a challenge. Also, we felt the employers need to stay connected to training delivery. So if your training is outsourced, then, you know, what's the quality of the training and how can you monitor D&I within that delivery of training? So it's a bit like, you know, the procurement process in a way. And widely advertised the recent introduction of the confidential reporting system. So I don't know how many people are aware of this, but CHIRP, on behalf of the CAA, have launched a confidential reporting line. And if you're bullied, harassed or subject to sexual harassment, you can report to CHIRP, and they're gathering data on that. So that was launched last October. And, you know, one of our recommendations is this being widely advertised amongst the airlines? You know, do people know it's actually in existence? That's really important. What's the point of having it if people don't know it's there? In terms of the CAA, obviously they've done a very good job in launching that reporting line, and which is really encouraging. But they have to review that reporting process, and they have to make that the training area a safer environment for women. You know, that, and also they need to think about the quality of what's being delivered as well, because a lot of men were dissatisfied with that. So look at the point of training for new recruits to the industry. Keep them safe. You know, that's what we have to emphasise. If this is what the trainees are telling us, then, you know, are they safe? Do they feel happy? You know, is it an environment they want to be in? And the government is introducing a duty on employers to protect those in the workplace from sexual harassment. So, you know, why not get ahead of that? And, you know, try to make sure it's not happening. in the first place. So, you know, the way to do that is to think about the next generations and start tackling it from the ground upwards.
So this is for Marnie.
Yeah.
So I hope you agree it's quite a comprehensive report. I'd like to kind of summarise that actually there is a lot more to this report than just what you've seen today. Today is just a small snapshot of everything we found, and there is more data in the report about the gender pay gap, the effects that the pandemic had on women in particular. For example, we did find that 62% of female pilots were furloughed in our survey, whereas only 30% of men were. And I think that there's so much in this report. Unfortunately, we were limited on time and funding. We could collect as much data as we needed to, and I would like to think this data is available for the next 4 years. So we're already 1 year into our 5-year window. And the promise we made to the people who contributed to this survey as part of the ethics committee is that the data will be destroyed after 5 years. So it is important that anyone who is interested in using this as a benchmarking process, it is quite important, and the University of West of England can access that data ethically, and you'll need to talk to them about how you do that if you are interested. But I would fully encourage it. There is a lot of data that we weren't able to look at, unfortunately. But has the question of diversity and inclusion gone away during the pandemic? No. I think actually it's come to the forefront. There's a lot of things going on, but our industry has had a watershed moment. It's been leaned down. We've had several retirements. We've had working practices changed, contracts changed. And I think our training burden is going to increase over the next 5 years. And I myself have taken the opportunity during the pandemic to get myself qualified as the next level of training. I was already in training, but I decided to progress. And I think it's important that we all encourage each other to do that and understand how we can do that. And we need the industry to embrace that as well. So we need to build back better is the message for the future. There's a lot that can be done in this industry to make it sustainable, not only environmentally, but also business-wise. So the data is, if anyone would like to contact UWE about the data, please feel free to do so. We'll put some emails up very shortly. So my biggest thing that I'd like to point out about this study, it's been a long year, and change is not going to happen organically, despite what people think. Change doesn't happen on its own. There are quotes in the report which say that it will take 100 years for gender parity to actually get anywhere. Now, I won't be around in 100 years' time. In fact, neither will my daughters. But I have to say, we need to do something positive now, because you cannot actively encourage a diverse group of people into an industry which does not foster their well-being, look after them, and make this a worthwhile investment. So please, please think about that for the future. Hopefully we've provided you with some good points to start the ball rolling, but we really need the industry to be really active in this area so that it makes it a better and more inclusive place for everybody to work. Thank you.
Okay, so the report is available on the link, and the link will be put into the chat so you can access it. If anybody has some inquiries about the research we've done, or any potential future research that you'd like us to take on, then these are our email addresses. Any press inquiries, please, through the press office for either the Royal Aeronautical Society or here at the University of the West of England. So thank you very much for your participation. We look forward to hearing some of your questions, and I'm now going to pass over to Carey, who is going to moderate the Q&A session. So if you'd like to put any questions in the comments, and I'm going to stop sharing slides now, and we'll come and join you on the video.
Okay, so after a brilliant presentation, representing some brilliant research, I'd be happy to first of all quote some of the questions that have come in already on the chat, and then if there are some questions online, we'll take those as well. But in order of, I suppose, time priority, that's probably the best thing to start off with, because we've only got a few at the beginning. One from Colin, which Colin asks, just over 50% of people would recommend a career. And what he'd be interested to know is what is the demographic of that? In other words, in terms of age and background. And I suppose that's one for Stella, really, isn't it? Oh, probably soon.
Could you just quickly ask the question again? Stella was controlling.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Is there a breakdown of the demographic in terms of who would recommend a career by age or by background? Because the statistic was that 50% or over 50% would recommend a career. Presumably that's 50%.
We did it, yeah, we did that particular breakdown just by gender, because that's where we were concentrating. We do have the data, so we have ethnicity, we have age group, and we obviously have what role they are currently. I'm not sure about background. We didn't ask us socio-economic groups or anything like that, no. But we do have some other demographics that we could slice the data with.
But basically, for the purposes of this report, it just gives that ballpark figure. But I don't think we presented that separately by gender, did we, for that question? I mean, we could easily access it, but we didn't do it for that part. I mean, the report is so big anyway. If we started slicing the data by breaking down the demographics, we were worried about people being identified for one thing, but especially with the quotes. But we do have access to that. But sorry, Colin, we can't answer that question right now.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sue and Stella. One other question from Helen Heenan. She said she'd be interesting to know what the essential criteria are, and I presume that's for female or for trainers. And I think we do have that in the report already. We didn't show it on the slides, but in the, main part of the report.
Do you mean the skills?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I didn't have that in front of me actually, because I anticipated that question. Yeah. Okay, so we asked pilots and pilot trainers, men and women, what they thought the essential skills were to be a pilot trainer. And we say this in the report in more detail, but basically there weren't any gender differences by what pilot trainers said were the key skills and what pilots who could potentially be pilot trainers said were the key skills. So there were skills like diagnosing trainees' difficulties and giving them guidance. That was one of the top skills. The second one was to motivate trainees. That came out quite strongly. So being able to motivate, being approachable and supportive. That was a really popular skill as well. So these are the top 5 that they're actually in the report. Adapting to the needs of trainees. And the 5th one was assessing trainee performance fairly and giving constructive feedback. And in addition to that, they talked about good communication skills, good listening skills, being able to build rapport, giving empathy. And we didn't find any big gender differences in those skills. So the top 5, maybe the motivation might have been a bit more important for women than it was for men, but very, very slightly. And so that's why, we're really sort of confident that, this job can be done by men or women.
In fact, Helen goes on to say that if the criteria are set by the Old Boys Network, then it follows that the criteria will suit similar personnel. And she actually does make the comment, how I wonder how many trainer skills such as empathy, compassion, mentoring, etc., including, of course, Sue's just highlighted that not only are they mentioned, but they're actually in the top 5 or similar skills to that, or top 5 in terms of the essential criteria. Quite a nice comment again from Helen, which is the sexism question is tough. As a female pilot, I'm often laughed when I get treated differently because I'm female. And she says, well, who knows? I've never been a man. So that's quite a bit of fun. Marnie, did you want to add to that?
No, that's absolutely fine. I completely agree with that. I was just reading some of the other questions that, if I might just sort of boldly answer out of order slightly. I think there was a bit of a discussion about whether whether pilots in general start their careers on part-time contracts. Actually, as a result of the pandemic, they did. And that's the point, is the fact that the pandemic has provided this watershed moment where what is part-time in the airline industry? Part-time in the airline industry is not the same as part-time 9 to 5 in your work. Part-time can mean lots of different things. The issue is that most pilots don't want to work a 60-hour week, even normally going into the sort of end of their career. So there is it's a very unique thing. The pilot environment and working hours are very unique. But when pilots talk about part-time, they might actually talk about a 36-hour week as being 50% contract. So we need to be very careful about this. But to answer the question that was raised, is do pilots start part-time in the industry? Yes, they can, and they have done, but only as a result of the pandemic, because that was what was required to save jobs in the airline industry. So I think that's why I'm saying this is a very special time to be able to look at some of the things that were raised. Did it work? How did it work? And all this research needs to be collected for the future. Sorry, Kerry, I digressed slightly there.
No, that's fine. One question which is slightly out on the time, but I know that Hugo put his hand up quite early on, so I'll take his in that order. Hugo says, I know everybody can read it, but just for those who aren't accessing the chat and are just listening, many thanks for a comprehensive and detailed report of a fascinating work. Thank you, Hugo. Could you please expand on your considerations on how women pilots engage differently with the technology? And he says, if I understand properly, you mentioned briefly about men performing as more confident than women.
So if I could answer that question as well, with regards to the way we fly our aircraft now is very different to the way aircraft were designed back in the 1950s. So now we have pilot competencies which play a huge role in the airline environment, and for safety there's a very good reason why those competencies are in place. We're no longer expected just to be able to fly the aircraft manually. We're expected to be able to manage an entire operation which has complexities in it, which require certain skills and aptitudes, which may not be the same as the ones that when they developed aptitude tests back in the 1950s, where you just flew your aircraft without autopilots or computers. So what we're saying is that often teamwork, communication, monitoring skills, the ability for situational awareness, what's going on, multitasking, all these competencies individuals have. They're not gender specific, but actually if you were to describe those competencies, some people might say, oh gosh, that sounds like a good job for a woman. Yet traditionally pilots aren't seen as they're not seen as the traditional competencies required for pilots. So to answer your question, how does modern technology, I'm flying a 4th generation aircraft, and with the introduction of these competencies, they've seen safety increase as a result of it. So you have to look at how these competencies and what does our future pilot look like? Who do we need sitting in the seat of these modern aircraft? And you might find it's not the same person that was sitting in the seat 50 years ago. So that's how women potentially can fit into it, but more research needs to be done in that area. It's completely, it hasn't been touched yet, but we recognise that there will be an important element to that for future research. Was there another part to that question?
No, I think that was oh, sorry, yes, there was. It was, you mentioned that men perform as more confident than women.
Well, that is something that is more of a gendered acceptance, I should say. It's not strictly speaking true, but generally speaking, as pilots, we don't want overconfident pilots. We want well-balanced pilots who are prepared to admit when they've made an error, and also prepared to be open and approachable. And therefore, confidence doesn't always come into it. you need to be confident in what you're doing, but you don't need to be overconfident. So I think confidence now, it's replaced with emotional intelligence, and that's something that we really need to be looking for in our trainers, in our pilots, and in our future pilots.
Thank you, Marnie. That's very comprehensive. Isabel asks, do you have any suggestions on how to get more female trainers into role model positions in the short term? For example, how do you get more female training managers if there's very few female trainers in the first place?
Well, sorry, speak on.
No, come on.
I think what we need to do is encourage airlines to really look at the pool of talent they currently have available. That's the first starting point. And also, I think there's quite a few trainers that have already got the training qualifications who aren't being tapped into by the airlines, possibly because of this part-time issue. So I think the airlines need to have a really good look around about who is actually available. They need to ask people to come forward and start having the discussions with them, what might encourage them to do training within the airline environment, rather than going to third-party providers who might provide them with a better work-life balance outside their flying roles. That is one suggestion. But you don't have to have female trainer role models. You can have male trainer role models who actively encourage women. This is the issue that I've found in work I've done before, is the fact that men are very reluctant to encourage women and support women in the everyday working environment. So I don't know if that's something that you found as part of the mentoring side of things.
Yeah, we did. And the point I was going to make was, when we first started doing the research for the outer mentoring scheme, people said, well, there aren't that many women in the industry, but our point was, but we're bringing them together through outer. So we're bringing women who are scattered all across the industry into one place. And there are so few female pilot trainers, but the same thing can be done. And that's why we recommended, something similar to outer in the airline industry. The airlines could club together and, have something like this up and running within months. But it brings those people together, so it becomes a bit of a hub, bit of a community space, but also it's a space where you can tap into that female role model or mentor if that's what you want. I agree, they don't have to be female. It's good to have the support of male trainers as well, but I think we have to kind of get them into a similar space, and there are various ways that we can do that.
Thank you, Sue. Juha Sivanen is asking if anybody has any information or any views as to why in India they have 3 times more female commercial pilots than the rest of the world.
Well, my answer to that, sorry, we keep jumping in at the same time. I'll just comment on that. I think we should do a comparative study of India and the UK, because as I said earlier, the best way to learn and the best way to change things is to look at somebody who's already doing it. Now, 15% is low. Let's not applaud that number, but it's still a lot better. It's almost 3 times as much as we have in the UK. So yes, that's a really good question. I'd love to know the answer to it. And I think that requires to be looked at in more closely. So Juha, if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'd be really happy to have a chat with you about that.
I think there, just to add, and only to add to that, there are people who we obviously had a very high response from India, and I thank my other, if you like, representative on the flight crew training group, Priti, who has kindly disseminated the information. But there are other factors which in India are quite unique to India, and I'm pretty sure that I can put you in contact with her and she'd be able to explain how there have been government initiatives and also other mechanisms which have been put in place to encourage women to go into that, as well as I believe there's very strong STEM subjects and it's seen as a more acceptable career for women to go into the flying role. But these are all things that I've heard anecdotally, and as Sue said, I think that it's really important that we look at this in a more academic way, as I feel that we've had to do with this particular subject as well, even though it's been on the agenda for many years.
Thanks, Marnie. There are a number of comments in the chat rather than questions, so I think I'll move on to specific questions, unless those who are making comments want to make a question out of their comment. Noella King says, very interesting report, thank you all. Thank you, Noella. How do we get our employers to take this seriously and make some changes?
Good question. Well, this is, I say in the report, this is the starting point, and we want the industry to listen to this, and let's get the ball rolling. There are lots of recommendations in that report. We don't have to do them all at once, but Stella and I would love to have a discussion with anybody in the industry who's interested in changing your industry. We've got the data. We don't necessarily need to do more research on the UK airline industry. And as Marnie's already said, a lot of that data is not even analysed. So, but yeah, we'd love to, I think you have to take actions. You can't just say, oh, that's an interesting report, and walk away from it. We're looking for the leaders in the industry, the people that have vision to step up and say, okay, yeah, I'd really like to do something about this.
I think it's also quite important to highlight the fact that this isn't just a UK-based report, and I think this was quite important, that actually these findings were across the world. And this was an issue that wasn't just, this is an industry-wide issue. And what can individual companies do about it? Well, they can start stepping up for a start, and they can actually make the changes that we've recommended. And I think with the important scheme that the CAA has put out with identifying bullying, harassment and victimisation, they are going to be identifying organisations where there are issues. They will be looking at it. They will be having hotspot maps on which organisations are failing their individuals. And I just think it's really important that we address this. We're honest. The general public won't stand for this, I don't think. You've seen that recent reports that have come out with regards to the Met, the sport, there is a lack of tolerance for not being diverse. I think that we need to move this industry on now and start being more innovative, because it's basically stifled at the moment by not allowing progress.
I think just to add to that, I mean, the report, we've got the evidence is given in the report. So the evidence from the quotes from the focus groups and from the open questions in the survey. So the survey statistics speak for themselves. But when you have that added qualitative, the experiences, lived experiences, this is evidence. This is happening now. This has happened for a long time, and I think it's not something that you can walk away from. It's there. It's happening, and it would be disgraceful if something isn't done.
Thank you, Stella. Andy Mitchell makes a suggestion with a question mark, so I'll sneak that in as a question, but it's a very good one. He's pointing out that the instructor competencies in the EASA competency framework actually do reflect the top 5 that's come out of the report, which is great. And so therefore, perhaps training management just need to incorporate the asset competencies, and I think that will be a great move forward in ensuring that perhaps there's gender barriers are removed. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think what Abby has said, sorry if it was Abby, apologies if that wasn't correct. I think what Abby's saying is really
Andy, sorry, Andy.
Andy, I'm sorry, Andy. I think it's really important that we do incorporate these competencies into the whole training environment. Why are they not in there already? Unfortunately, they sit in the background, but this is going back to, let's make the process transparent. Let's also make it objective as opposed to subjective. And that's what's actually happened in our industry, is the fact that as you get higher up your career, or as you go further along in your career, it becomes more about who you know, what you know, as opposed to what you know. And also these defined structures seem to sort of disappear. And for example, to become a TRI, you need to have 1,501 hours under the CAA regulation, which I believe was EASA originally, and then you can become a trainer. There is no other guideline as to what we define as what you need to do, what competencies you need to display, unless we implement these EASA recommendations. But they are not required. There are only recommendations, but we do need to move forward in that area so that everything becomes more transparent and more objective in the selection process.
Thank you, Marnie. Isabel had a follow-on from her previous questions. How do you encourage your airline to be more broad-minded if it is a little slow to adopt a different view of the world?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think you have to call out what's happening in the workplace. I think you have to put pressure on employers to, having the stats there and saying that, the gender stats are so poor, this doesn't look good for this industry. What can we do about it? I think don't just wait for your employers to do it. Help them, work with them. That's what I would say. Put the pressure on, but also say, let's form a working group. Any airline tackling this in the report, I wouldn't just say one person needs to concentrate on this. If I was an airline listening to this, I would be putting a project group together, people represented across the organisation. What can we do to improve this, and what can we do to actually allow more women into this pilot trainer role? Because at the end of the day, that's what we've looked at, 0.9%. I keep saying that statistic because it's shocking. So what can we do? How can we help each other? How can we work together as an industry? Because the outer mentoring scheme is industry wide. It has competitors working together to offer support to women. So that's really powerful.
I think that's a really valuable solution, actually, Sue, because this is what I mean by the fact that this project was made possible because people connected outside their airline environment, and that support should continue to make changes now within each person's individual airline environment. I think the fact that it's probably one of the few reports which isn't airline specific but covers most of the big airlines have responded, their pilots have responded in this report. And I think that you would be able to go to most airlines in the world and basically call them out on some of the issues that have been raised in this report. And that is because those people have been able to speak up about the issues and not kept quiet. It's really hard, Isabel, to stand up and put your head above the parapet. And actually, I'm not suggesting you do that. What I am suggesting is that people come together and do it collectively, because it's a very powerful message that way. I think it's difficult for women, but we need to support each other and start making changes. And I think what the CAA has done with that reporting process has started the ball rolling, if I'm honest, because now it's a case of, does your company have reporting structures in place to report difficulties that they're experiencing? Who can you talk to about the fact that you are unhappy about the way your career is progressing? Does it have to be your pilot management? I think these are perfectly valid questions which any employer should be able to answer, but I doubt many airlines can actually say, yes, we have an open policy where you can report whatever you like, because we all know that's not true.
I'd also like to add to this point, which I think is really important. There's a power in networks, that people coming together. It doesn't just have to be women's networks. So, there's a group of people who are challenging their employers about the way the industry or that employer is operating. So, it's not about women sticking their necks out on their own. It's about people coming together, because we found in this study, there was such a lot of support from the men that responded to the survey as well. There was a very, very small minority who kind of said, well, women can do this if they want to. Well, actually they can't. So, but there was a lot of support there. And I really think working together, working in networks and, challenging it in a collective way.
And I think also creating more opportunities for women to go into training and helping people understand the route into training. there was very little support for women generally, whereas men tended to have informal advocacy and support and encouragement from most areas, from the training department all the way through to their peers, whereas women definitely did not have that support there, and that comes out in the report quite strongly. So I think we need to start putting people together and start tackling some of the issues head on, as well as the industry needs to listen, and hopefully they will. This is just the starting point. Hopefully, as I said, we can move forward on this and start to get some more engagement from the industry.
Thanks, Marnie. Dr. Harpreet Singh, you have your hand up, but I don't think you can speak. So I'll give you an opportunity to put something in the chat while I take another question, a secondary question actually from Katja Winkenberg. I don't think this was answered before. To what extent do training programs or airlines use assessment centers? Because that would give much higher predictive validity and less about fit than just having interviews.
Are a particular difficulty for pilots. So in the initial process, they use selection centres a lot, but there's quite a big cost for people to go into there. We haven't really touched on funding. I have written a piece on funding in the report, but we haven't touched on it on this particular presentation. But funding is still to date one of the biggest barriers for going into pilot training, full stop. Selection centres, you are right. A formal selection process would help with going into training, the training role, because it gets less formal. The selection process is the further up the airline you go in terms of career progression. So most pilots at the initial stages of their career will do selection centres, which are third party and normally have a cost attached. I think I would be a supporter of selection centres if there was no cost attached, but I would be very cynical about whether that may happen in the future, and therefore perhaps would consider opting for an internal recommendations for a selection process for training roles.
Thanks, Marnie. Surabhi Mishra asks, can we talk about how unjust the situation of maternity leave is in airlines? As a pilot, we need to maintain certain health standards, and just 6 months maternity leave is not enough to have a baby and get back into shape or meet those health criteria. Of course, most people just take leave without pay.
We did have, from our sample, 75% of, or 74% of the female respondents had actually taken maternity leave. We didn't go into a huge detail. We didn't ask any follow-up questions necessarily about maternity leave, but that did come up spontaneously in some of the open comments where people were talking about maternity leave as being a barrier to their career progression.
I think the other thing that's quite important to mention, going back to this funding, is that what we did find is that female pilots were very much along lines of planning their careers. They had to pay back their debts, and then they had to save up for maternity leave. Then they had to think about whether they wanted to go into training or have a family. And it was a very different experience to what perhaps their male counterparts might be experiencing. We didn't investigate that, but we have got evidence to suggest that that is what's going on. So I think I would welcome a study which had some funding to look into this. I really think that the industry now needs to invest into some of the issues. And the argument might be, well, there aren't enough people to affect this issue. No, there are enough people that will affect this issue, because if you sort out these issues, then you will encourage more diversity in the first place. And it is a really important issue. So I would say that we need to have a bit more thought put into this. And yes, you're right, it's not a great system at all at the moment, and it varies from airline to airline. But once again, the power of communication is starting to work, and people are getting together to start comparing which employers are better with their maternity policies than others. And hopefully we'll be able to get to the bottom of which ones work and which ones don't.
Thanks, Marnie. I'm coming to the end of questions, so what I'll do is I'll take one particular comment from Nihar Kulkarni, and then if anybody else wants to ask questions, they've got a couple of minutes to think about it while I'm reading this out, and maybe the team will comment on it. And the House says one of the recommendations of the report was highlighting women pilots in the media. Whenever this was done in my airline, there was a general positive reception from the public. However, there is backlash and resentment from our male colleagues who feel they are left out of the limelight and receive no recognition. They doubled down on the negative comments and sexist jokes, etc.
Can I answer that question? I actually think it's a really important topic, and I think that's why I think we talk about the report saying that there is a lack of understanding in a way as to how to promote the female pilot role with diversity and inclusion in mind. Now, yes, we need to try and find a way of targeting women to say this is not a gendered role as you might perceive it to be. But I think we need to have the conversation. It's the old thing of if several reports have reported that men feel that the gender question is being addressed adequately. I would disagree with that. I don't think it's being addressed adequately, because you're right. Women who are prepared to stand up in the media and put themselves forward are scrutinised and criticised. And we did find that female pilots in training were told you're only here because you're a woman. I think that's absolutely abhorrent and wrong. The CAA does not ask you whether you're male or female on your exams and then say, oh, because you're a woman, you're passing. So I think that it's really important that we have these policies. I think they are important, unfortunately. We saw in our data that between the years 2016 to 2021, we saw a marked increase in the percentage of female pilots who qualified. Now, how do we balance that with protecting those individuals that are going through the process in this time of highlighting women? And I think that's a really important piece of work that we need to address, so that we put in place responsible social media policies, that your organisation supports you 100% in knocking down any negative comments, you're only there because you're a woman, because that gives young women, or even any woman in the profession, I find it quite insulting, to be honest. I've spent 22 years in this industry and I do my very, very best to perform well. I don't expect somebody to stand there and say you're only there because you're a woman. And I think it's really important that we protect the young women coming through, and that they know they're there on their merit, and that it's unacceptable for other people to comment on the reasons why they think they're there.
Can I come in there as well? I do think, I think if you've got a recruitment campaign for female pilots, for example, if you just launch that campaign and you don't communicate with your male and female pilots and explain why you're doing it, because I think people need to understand the rationale for these initiatives. So I think what often happens is something gets launched and, you know, the men might say, oh, another women's initiative. But I think if people understand why it's there, and, you know, that there are good solid reasons for it, you know, just throw in the stats at them, you know, only 6% of pilots are women, you know, that's not enough. And I think, you know, I think sometimes it's communication. I think Marnie's touched upon that, but it's about not explaining in simple terms. It's more about this is why we're doing this. This is why it's important for the airline, and this is why it's important for your profession. So I think there needs to be a clear communication channel, and, you know, some dissemination events. You know, that this is why we're doing it.
I think it's also important to acknowledge that if we perhaps didn't have all these issues around funding, we might not have a lot of these issues in the first place. And I think that we need to, one of the schemes that I have worked on in the past did actually offer the same opportunities to men, but they weren't advertised in the same way. So I think that the messaging is really, really important, and also the support for those individuals who find themselves bravely in the position of leading the way in those schemes. I think it's really, really important.
Okay, thank you very much, Marnie and Sue. That brings us to the end of any questions or even comments that have been raised. Would anyone like of you three to make a final comments, or please?
Sorry, we've just spotted something in the chat, Kerry. It's just a comment rather than a question about, has anybody done a thematic analysis of the way that that pilot trainer roles are, you know, advertised. I think that's really important as well.
Okay.
No, we haven't, but I think it would, if they are advertised, not all of them are, but the majority of them are, I think that would be really important. And has it had a D&I lens over it as well, you know, in terms of the advert? I think that's really important.
Can I also,
okay.
Kerry, may I add, there was just a slight error in one of the slides, and I just wanted to comment that if you do want to have a look at the what we referred to as the Women in Defence report, it's actually the House of Commons Defence Committee report, protecting those who protect us. So if I could just make that correction for the record, it's an important document, and it was published in 2021. I just wanted to state that for the record. It was a slight oversight. I apologise for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Marnie. Okay, so that brings us to the end. I mean, it's fantastic that you know, even over an hour and a half in, we're still over 80 people still engaged in the webinar and clearly interested. If anybody does have any questions, and of course they can send those to Sue, Stella, or Marnie after this event. I thought the questions were answered brilliantly. I thought they were extremely good questions, and I thought that the answers were very informative, and hopefully did actually answer the question, which isn't always the case. Many thanks indeed for everybody for coming and for spending time with us, sharing this superb research. And if all I can say is a plea to my male colleagues to actually support the things that have been raised, because I think it's you know, incumbent on all of us to actually help address this imbalance that we clearly have. So that's all for us. Thanks again. Stay safe. Drive carefully, fly carefully wherever you're going, and looking forward to meeting again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.